This is No Sex Please, I'm religious. In many parts of the world, people are dying and being killed because of who they are and who they love. If you want to support this podcast, please visit nosexplease.com.au and follow the donation links there.
How do you define an orgasm?
Define that for me, sexual being. How do you define sex?
Hi, I'm Alex. America raised me to be ignorant about sex.
The vulva? I think that's what that is.
It's not the vulva.
Vagina majoris? The vagina minoris?
Not quite.
No?
Did you ever think you had to have a sex talk with the kids?
I always thought Dad should do it.
We don't wait for people to say, I'm ready for algebra. We introduce that when they're developmentally ready to take on algebra. Ovaries.
The cervix.
Called an erection.
Clitoris.
But in America, comprehensive sex ed still meets a lot of resistance.
They should stay out of sex. That belongs to the family.
But if you, your parents, and their parents never learned to talk about sex, how do you learn to talk about sex? So, at 36 years old, I'm finally gonna confront my fears head on.
For the prostate stimulation, put it in deeper.
You're probably wondering why I came to you.
Yes, I was wondering, Alex.
I do have a lot of sexual thoughts that I'm like, that doesn't seem right.
I think it's time to start asking some questions.
There's probably going to be poop.
Well, that was quite an introduction to No Sex Please, I'm religious, with the trailer for Sexplanation. And I have with me the producer, the creator, the host, the presenter, Alex Liu. Did I pronounce you?
You got it perfect. You got it perfect. Yeah. Thanks for having me. This is such a treat.
That's great. And just need you to look up at the camera.
I'm trying to look at you.
Oh, sorry. Isn't it?
I can put you up closer up to the screen. Yeah.
Can you do that? Yeah, that's great. Otherwise, it looks like you're terribly sad. Alex, I've got to say, I'm really impressed with that documentary, and I'm impressed with the courage that you showed in creating it and then doing the whole thing. I think it's going to be very, very helpful to lots of people. And this one of the sayings I have with this podcast is that if it's not discussed, it's disgusting.
That's great. I agree fully.
Yeah, and of course you talk about your sex shame in that documentary, and perhaps not necessarily using those words, but as a gay man and as you start off in that trailer talking about your ignorance of sex.
I would definitely call it sex shame. I think most cultures in the world, you're instilled with a sense of shame around sex very, very early on. In the film we talk about, it's parents who are nervous around even saying the biologically correct, anatomically correct terms for genitalia, penis, vulva, and kids sense very early on that this is a topic that makes people uncomfortable, and I think we all are born into a culture kind of just like language, like anything, you soak it up very early, and it maybe served a purpose 5,000 years ago when we didn't understand our bodies, when we didn't understand psychology, sexuality, biology as much as we do now. But for me, it was causing a lot of problems, and I think it caused a lot of problems for a lot of people in today's modern age.
Well, curiously, last night I was talking to a friend of mine who echoed the same thing. That even in marriages, most people don't talk honestly about sex. Younger people may, and I'm talking about heterosexual as well as straight marriages. Hang on.
Yeah, I think a lot. I think a lot about that. So many people have come talk to me about after watching your film. After watching the film, like my partner of 30 years, I finally admitted something to them that I never did. And, that blows my mind because, a person can know you, you can live with them, you can share bank accounts, you can share, almost everything. But you can't share this thing because we're all kind of terrified that if we fully admit our sexual desires or that somehow that makes us disgusting, like you said. And um, you know, I think the best way it's been framed to me is you might, yes, have something that's atypical, that not the majority of people experience, but it's totally normal. It's totally within the range of normal sexual behavior. It would be very, very, very rare, and probably never happen that you'd be the only person in the entire world to ever experience sexuality in that way. And uh, the diversity of human sexuality is something that I think that we really don't talk about, and we haven't really talked about till very recently. I think it wasn't until the 1950s, 1960s with Alfred Kinsey that we finally admitted that everyone basically masturbates. And that's, I feel still some shame admitting that, even though it's something we all every adult, pretty much every adult
Does it?
experiences,
Yes.
does,
Yes.
enjoys on a
Yes.
regular basis, but it's one of the most shameful things, that kind of scary things to admit in polite conversation.
And the curious thing is that medically, they say that for men at least, it's healthier to do that, and it can actually possibly have benefits for the prostate.
Oh, totally, yeah, and I think that makes complete sense. It's taken a long time, but I think I finally have gotten around to the fact that, like, it's not my fault that I was born into a human body and into a human brain. That is just, it is, and you have to accept life as it is. And I've spent so far too much time and wasted far too much of my mental health trying to change something that's impossible to change.
I absolutely love that line. It's not your fault you were born into a human body.
Yeah, it's weird that I think it is, in some weird, some perverse way. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So, Alex, I also love in the film, so I'm hoping that from this, lots of people will seek it out. But um, I love the interactions with your parents, and
Yeah.
like when you ask the question of your mother, and
Yeah.
your father about the sex talk, and your mother sort of says, "Oh, I thought he would do it."
Right. Yeah, yeah. I don't think parents themselves have great models, right? Their parents probably didn't talk to sex about them, so they don't really know how to do it. One of the things I think that came out of this whole process, we visited some sex ed classes in the film with parents and children together,
Yeah,
and that model makes a lot of sense to me because I think parents need as much sex education as kids in many regards, many respects. Just the practice of being in a safe space and saying the words, masturbation, orgasm, clitoris, these words that really we don't say out loud, especially not to our children. Having that space and doing it together, and you know, admitting and having kind of seeing that the fear and terror we might have about that, it pales in comparison to the potential damage and despair that not talking about these things might have.
yeah, it's totally true. So, Alex, how has the film done? Are you
I
you
mean,
getting a lot going out there?
yeah, I can't even believe someone, halfway around the world even wants to talk to me about this. That it just blows my mind that I was scared that, I'm gay, Asian, it would only connect to a small, I'm already seen as a niche kind of, in the States, I'm kind of seen as a niche, artist. And so the idea that anyone outside of the San Francisco Bay Area even saw the film it just kind of blows my mind. So, I've talked to people from all around the world, from all different continents, saying that, watching the film has given them that little ounce of courage they needed to talk to a partner, to talk to family, to talk to friends. I think it's just, it's hard for me to even process the idea that something that I made on a kind of a lark really has connected with anyone. But I think the the response I was most afraid of was my parents' response. What would they think? Because it's a very open, vulnerable way. We're all being very vulnerable and open, and that's just been the best response ever. That I think for the first time in the first 30 plus years of my life, my father finally understood why it was so important to me to do something like this. Because him, an immigrant, who the idea that I would make a documentary about sex education seems so risky, and for him to fully understand that, and for my mom to be able to see this and see it with audiences, I mean, that's just been the best part of the whole process. That we're so much closer now, and so much more actual friends in a way that I think has just enriched my life in so many ways.
No, that is truly wonderful. And did they ever have any issues with your sexuality?
Oh, my father did for sure. My mom, I knew would always be okay because she had, grown, she had gay friends, and so I knew she had gay friends, and I think my dad was okay with it. But when I came out, the first thing he said to me was the idea of two men being intimate was one of the most disgusting things he could ever think about, and that was hard to work through. But to my
Yeah,
father's credit, he never gave up. He went to gay prides even though he was incredibly uncomfortable. He went to gay indie films that I wanted to go to. He always showed up for me in ways that many of my friends' parents did not show up for them.
no, no.
So I it was a people ask me a lot. They watch the film and they're like, I want that relationship with my parents, and I'm like, I wish I could. You could maybe, but the one thing you don't see in the film is that it's that's 20 years of work. 20 You don't see all the crying and screaming and silent treatment and all the work and therapy and all that, but I think it's been just such a gift that I have this relationship with my father. That parent child relationships will always be challenging and filled with their own specific tension points, but we're closer now than I ever thought ever could be possible.
Well, those scenes in the film are some of the best. That's just so, it's really beautiful.
Oh,
Um,
thank you.
yeah. Um, Tell me, your you. I've got a mental blank.
No,
Fortunately,
no,
I
no
can.
worries.
Fortunately, I can edit it out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah. It'll come back to me in a minute. Um, yeah. The film itself, I can't recommend it highly enough to anyone because your honesty is really refreshing. Do you have a religious background of any kind?
So I grew up Catholic, but I never was fully bought in. My parents didn't baptize me. But we went to Catholic mass until I was about 12. I think they wanted me to make the decision myself because they
Yes.
themselves weren't necessarily happy about the decisions that were made for them and their
Yeah.
upbringing in the Catholic Church.
Well,
We
they're
kind of
right.
touch a little bit on the
I think.
film, but like I think they were pretty harsh to the female members of my family in
Mm,
terms of
mm.
understanding their bodies and things like that. So yeah, I grew up there thinking that if I was gay, I was going to hell. That only heterosexual marriage was the only place where sex was morally right. So yeah, that was a huge source of shame and eventually suicidal ideation in ways that I'm so just the one thing about this film I try to make is like, what would that kid at 12 or 13-year old needed to hear at the time, to think differently, and that was always my north star about what kind of film I wanted to make.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that was a huge driver into why I felt like this film had to be made. I think I saw through the process of the film and talking to people like you and talking to all these different people around the world, I think I've let go a lot of the anger, but I think I was just so angry for so long, for decades, that I went through that process in a way that makes really very little sense if you look backwards. That
Yeah.
to put a kid through that process.
Oh, look. Yeah. Look, I agree. Tell me, um, did you mentioned therapy? Did you go through conversion therapy to try and?
No. I have friends who have done that. It's very, very sad and traumatic. But thankfully, my mom having gay friends and my dad not really being super religious, I think they accepted the, you know, biological fact that that I was a homosexual.
Yeah.
And so the therapy, I was very lucky that they immediately put me into, good cognitive behavioral therapy, and eventually I needed to see a psychiatrist to be put on antidepressants. But I'm lucky that we had the resources for me to do that, because many people are not that
No, they
lucky.
don't. Yeah. Well, New South Wales has just passed a law banning, um, sex therapy
Oh, that's
or
great.
conversion therapy,
That's great. Yeah.
and I hope to see that replicated around Australia.
Oh, yeah. Are they? Is that the first? Is that the first?
Yes, yes, to my knowledge, it
Okay,
is.
great. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
they're starting in the United States. States are starting to do that too. So
that's
it's good to
fantastic. And
see.
of course, years ago, well, a few years ago, when we brought in same-sex marriage, there were people who thought the world would end.
I
You
know.
know,
Now it's so boring. It's so yeah. It's nothing. Yeah.
I was a marriage celebrant until a couple of years ago, and um, I've got to say some of the best weddings I ever performed were same-sex ones
Oh,
because
yeah.
in one case the guys had been together for 21 years.
Okay. Right.
They'd bought each other rings 21 years ago.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's crazy.
And it was just such a happy, beautiful
Yeah.
affair.
Oh.
Quite sincerely.
Yeah, I
So
remember in San Francisco when it was finally allowed for the second time. It was allowed for a couple months, then banned by popular vote, and then allowed again by the Supreme Court. It was I remember being at City Hall, and people they just dropped what they were doing and ran to City Hall because they didn't know what would happen. And so you see couples who've been together forever, like one of them in full suit, the other one in, like workout clothes, like you know totally. And everyone, it was just a line of all these couples getting married. And it was just it was one of the most beautiful experiences I ever had, being in San Francisco City Hall with just couple after couple getting married.
that's
It's
great.
yeah, it's beautiful.
And at the same time, we still have wealthy conservative Christians, evangelical Christians, funding politicians and others in
Yeah.
East Africa and
Yeah.
other parts of Africa with the hate laws and people being killed, and yeah, so we've got a long way to go to try and make our world a kinder place.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's yeah, I've you know I've tried really hard to understand, why does this matter so much?
yeah,
To me, it makes so little sense why it matters so much, and I don't have any great answers. But I have, in a way, found, um, through this process of listening to people, talking to people, knowing that, sometimes all a person needs is you to listen non-judgmentally, and that can open things up in a way that I never thought possible. And so that's been the greatest gift of the movie, just talking to so many different people,
yeah.
hearing their stories, and being open to kind of taking that time to let someone else talk too, um, has been has shown me, that can maybe slowly over time, over generations maybe, open up people to different perspectives in a way that they may not have been otherwise.
Fantastic, Alex. Tell me what had other projects since then, and do you want to tell me anything about your projects and where your career is going?
It's so hard right now in terms of I do a lot of commercial work, that sort of thing.
Yep.
But yeah, I think there's a lot of different aspects that were that one of the projects that we're trying to get off the ground that I would love to do, that we didn't put in the film, is about the history, of sexuality.
Yeah.
Why did monogamy become the predominant, sexual coupling relationship?
Yeah.
10,000 years ago, when for most of hominid history, monogamy was not a thing, and we talked to so many historians about things like that, and how did different things like the birth control pill, how did things like the internet, how did these pun intended seminal moments in history change, completely blow up the predominant paradigm in terms of
Mm.
how humans connect.
Mm.
So I would love to do a series on that. We're pitching that right now, and there are I think one of the things that in the process of the film, one of the questions we explore is like, what is sex? Like, how do you define sex?
Mm.
Um, because yes, you can think of sex as intercourse, genital touching, but then what is phone sex? Is phone sex sex? It is,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
like what makes it sex?
Yeah.
And so kind of doing the same thing around gender. That's the other thing we really wish we had. We went to like a trans health clinic. We talked to trans youth, but ultimately we had to be pretty brutal in terms of what the story you can tell in 75, 80 minutes. And so what is the how do we define gender? And that's something that
Mm.
I'm really interested in, because that's going through a huge redefinition, and causing lots of cultural backlash at the moment. So that's something that I'm really interested in. So there's a two kind of things that I'm interested in, and yeah, and if one of these days I would love to do a gay rom-com. That's something that little tiny things that I'm trying to think of. But yeah, little fires, little irons in the fire right now. So hopefully it gets me off the ground soon.
Oh, that's fantastic. One of my previous interviews was with Shay Barnes in the UK, and she is a woman who goes, I'm sorry, she's neurodiverse. So they go out and they talk in companies and businesses and so on, about sexuality, and but from a scientific perspective. And of course, what they're now discovering is that there is a distinct difference between the brain sex, even brain sex identity, and the body.
Oh yeah.
And one example that she didn't use, but I remember an interview years ago, and this is with people who have, I can't remember what it's called, but they believe they should be an amputee.
Yeah, yeah.
Have
They'll cut up. They'll
yeah,
cut off their hand. They'll
uh,
cut off their arm because
yeah,
yeah,
and it's so strong.
yeah,
Now, obviously, you know, I mean, all that shows is the difference in our brains, and
yeah.
how our brains work. I long for a world where we won't actually have to clarify people as you know as queer, as not queer, as that.
I hope we're moving towards that. Yeah, because
Yeah.
I understand why labels. People. I don't know why labels are like politically advantageous. I understand why they're scientifically, biologically, medically
Mm.
advantageous. Um, but the boxes we put others and we put ourselves into, can never be as as expansive or as specific as we actually are.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally so. Um, Alex, give me one of your. Have you got any particular dreams of what you know how you'd like to see your life and the world in 10 years' time?
In 10 years, I would love to I think if I try to distill kind of what my who I am as, if I can be so pretentious to say artist, what I try to do is can I make, we took a really comedic lens with the film as much as possible
Yes, you did.
to kind of play with the more serious aspects that we were
Yeah.
thinking through.
Yeah.
And I think, can we get people to think critically about the taboos and mores of your culture, and in a way that lets down your guard, often through humor, often through vulnerable stories, um, to get you to think just maybe a little differently about yourself in a way you never have before. I
Mm.
think I didn't realize how unexamined a life I lived until maybe making this film. Definitely not before therapy, and how so many of the certainties I had in life were so unexamined. And that's something I think my life is so much better now that I feel like the way I see morality, the way I see spirituality, the way I see meaning is so much now more derived from my actual um, uh, internal kind of agency versus an external validation I was so keen on seeking for so much of my life. And so, and I often feel that most people are trying to live up to some sort of ideal that they didn't even really want in the first place. And so I think, that's what I'm hoping to do that through my work, to get people to, entertainment, engagement, attention will be first. But can I do it in a way, and can I slip in the medicine of like thinking about their own identities, their own morality, a little bit more critically, and maybe in a little bit way that moves us towards that kind of kinder vision that you were painting earlier. That life is just so hard, and there's so much suffering already just to exist, to survive. The more we can do to get rid of that suffering that is really placed on ourselves for no good reason other than some old rule or law from thousands of years ago. That's kind of where I hope I see myself going. So whether that's documentary, whether that's scripted, whatever it is, but yeah, something like that. Hopefully, that's not too long-winded of an answer for you.
No, that's really good, actually. What's it like living in America these days?
Do you have any work for me in Australia? Is there any is there a work visa that maybe I could get?
We'd love to have you
Yeah, it's weird. It's weird. I think what happened in America. America's so big. It's so big,
Massive.
and so and so it's very easy to cocoon yourself in a bubble in which you never really meet people with diverse opinions, thoughts. I think one of the things that was really interesting for me to do is, for the film, I was traveling around the country for a lot of 2021 and 2022. We purposely try to go into places like Indiana, Missouri, these places that maybe don't have a strong of a sex education, good sex education, in those states. And I think what you see on the news, on just TV, is true. Yes, we're very divided, very polarized. There's a lot of just political rancor. It's very toxic. It's very, very vitriolic. But when you really talk to people, when you really listen to people, when you get to people who are different than you, we're all just tired of it. I think we're all very tired of it. And there is this kind of like, I don't know if it's vengeance or it's like this anger industrial complex that really wants us to be angry and really wants us to be at each other's throats because there's so much money to be made doing that. And I'm sure you experienced that in Australia to some degree. I think
we have.
Yeah. But I think, we'll see with this next election. I mean, I don't think anyone is really looking forward to this election that's coming up. But yeah, I think it's as personally, I think it's as angry as I've ever seen American politics. We're not listening to each other in a way that makes any sense. There's too many incentives to divide us at the moment, and especially around these issues of sex and gender. I think school boards across this country, there's thousands of them. I think sex education is a huge fight in most of these school boards, and it's very easy to, there was a big debate maybe 1 or 2 years ago. So it's getting a little better now, but that to teach sex education was teaching pedophilia, was grooming these children. It's really kind of very scary, kind of disgusting arguments being made. So yeah, I'm of two minds of this, as you can hear. Part of me is like, oh, it's so awful, but then there is a part of me that sees a little bit, maybe it's wishful thinking, but hope, because I think so many of us are just so exhausted by the anger. There's just none left. We're we're kind of we've gotten to the point where I think we need to start listening to each other. At least that's where I am. So whereas, if you talked to me 10 years ago and you were introduced yourself as a Republican, I'm a Democrat. I would have thought very horrible things about you. I'm much more willing to sit down and listen and understand where you come from now, because what we're doing now isn't working. But that's just my long-winded 2 cents.
No, thank you. Look, we have. I don't think it's as bad in Australia, but I think that we certainly have the hard right, which says crazy things, and I'm the same as you. I try to, I don't want to listen to some people, and yet that's not good in itself, because you've got to try and get behind where this is coming from.
Yeah. I think, there are some people you're never going to change their mind, and some people it's not worth your time and energy, for sure. But I think where I see much less of the divide, like of how I want to spend my time as right, left, or Democrat, Republican, or however you want to define it. But I see more like, are you trying to be a good person? Are you at least a decent person? Even if you have different political views, are you open to learning or understanding? And then that's kind of where I see things. Excuse me, because I see, even on my side, on the left, I see a lot of people who are very rigid in their thinking, and very destructive and anarchic in their outlook on where we need to go. So, and that scares me more than, say, someone who's on the center right, who maybe is a little more ignorant, a little more scared, but isn't hateful.
Yeah. Well, Alex, thank you very much for your time today, and I look forward to hearing about your next project when the day comes.
Well, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for letting me ramble for 30 minutes about this. It just means the world that you would even take the time to listen.
No, you haven't rambled. You've been very, very good, and I'm sure that lots of people will love hearing this interview, and I really hope that many people are prompted to watch your wonderful doco.
Well, thank you so much.
Thanks very much for that. Some people around the world are giving money to spread messages of hate and to see LGBTIQ people marginalised, victimised, imprisoned and murdered. It's time for others to stand up and say enough is enough. Please support the work of this podcast, No Sex Please, I'm Religious, and visit our website www.nosexplease.com.au to make a donation today.